Welcome, everyone. We're just going to wait a couple of minutes as we're watching folks filter in, and then we'll kick off. All right. So exciting to see so many of you here. Stefano, thank you very much for agreeing to do this. Really appreciate it. I am going to introduce you, but as we wait for a couple more to trickle in, I'm going to surprise you and tell you my favorite thing to do at these webinars is to tell a joke. So the early birds get to hear it. And I have a perfect one picked out. So I hope you haven't heard it before because that'll kind of destroy the fun, but here it goes. Why did the economist have a door knocker on his house instead of a doorbell? Because he was hoping to win the Nobel Prize. All right, hopefully that warmed everybody up for a great presentation. Thanks for pulling up your slides. Let me introduce you and what we're going to do here today as people are continuing to trickle in. So Stefano DellaVigna actually needs no introduction, but he is the Daniel Koshland Senior Distinguished Professor of Economics and Professor of Business Administration at the University of California, Berkeley. And he specializes in behavioral economics, or psychology and economics, and is the co-director of the Berkeley Initiative for Behavioral Economics and Finance. And I'm Katie Milkman, your host today. I'm a behavioral scientist and the James G. Dinan Professor at the Wharton School of the University of Pennsylvania. But my more relevant affiliation for today is that I am a member of the National Academy's Board on Behavioral, Cognitive, and Sensory Sciences. We helped develop a study on the state of behavioral economics and its contributions to policy. And today, Stefano will be presenting some reflections on the work of the 13-person committee that was formed, chaired by Robert Moffett and Alison Buttenheim, and that he was a part of, that produced a report earlier this year in response to the call from this NAS board. And the report is called Behavioral Economics, Policy Impact and Future Directions. So we're going to drop a link to the report in the chat in just a minute. I also want to thank the two funders, the three funders, the Sloan Foundation, the W.K. Kellogg Age. We're very grateful to them. And at this point, let me just tell you our format. Stefano is going to present for about 20 minutes. You can see his slides are up and he's ready to go. After that, I will ask him a few questions on my mind. Hopefully some will relate to things that are on your mind. And then after 10-ish, 15 minutes of conversation, we'll open things up to audience questions, and then I'm going to moderate those. So there's a Q&A button at the bottom of your screen. As we go, feel free to put questions in that Q&A. I'm going to be keeping an eye on them. You can put them as early as you want. And then towards the end of the conversation, I'll be pulling those questions out and asking them of Stefano. And you can upvote questions if you're particularly excited about them, I believe. Finally, we'll close by 12:45 p.m. Eastern Time sharp. So Stefano, let me pass the baton to you. I'm really excited to hear your presentation. Thanks for taking the time.
Great. Thank you so much, Katie, for the introduction. Glad to be here and to talk about some thoughts about the future of behavioral economics and public policy. And those thoughts are kind of largely based on kind of this volume that the National Academies have authored and to which I contributed. So yeah, why would you want to read a novel by Dostoevsky when you can read this? That's kind of I'll try to say, like, some of the insights, and some are straight out of the report, and some are kind of course also thoughts that are particularly in my mind. So like certainly this presentation doesn't fully substitute or fully represent the report. But so this committee was charged to review the evidence regarding the applications of insights from behavioral economics to key public policy objectives. And so if you see the composition, it reflects some of the breadth of behavioral economics and behavioral science, with ranging kind of from, the co-chair economist Robert Moffett to kind of Alison Buttenheim, representing kind of the side on health, and some representation of kind of, psychology, for example, like Elder Shafir. And so you see the breadth of the committee, and we try to make that a strength to kind of bring together the insights. So let me start from what is one of the elephants in the room. Correctly, people might be saying, hey, yes, behavioral economics explains behavior. And the way it does it is by as follows: bias after bias after bias, long list. What do we make if there is one bias for every behavior to be explained? This is kind of the accomplished economist David Levine is like, there is a tendency to propose a new theory for every new fact, and the world doesn't need 1,000 different theories. So a big thing for us is, really, is behavioral economics a laundry list? That certainly, is a possibility, and that in our eyes would make it a lot less useful. We don't think so. In the report, we identify 5 behavioral factors that reliably affect behavior with public policy implications. And maybe think for a second what you would have put as kind of number 1 or 2. We felt that at the very top of it was limited attention. The idea that people have a hard time, I mean, obviously this isn't going to shock anyone, but really the idea that people have a hard time understanding information, whether it's understanding incentives or taxes or what a health plan is, and the idea that employees may be poorly informed, and that this is going to shape kind of how they perceive the cost and benefit. And a key part of it, therefore, is going to go into efforts on how to communicate. By the way, what am I showing you? What I'm showing you is a word cloud out of the whole report in the chapter on limited attention. So this is kind of a tool that you've probably seen used elsewhere. It's nice because it provides a visual summary of the content. And so obviously no substitute for the whole chapter, but it kind of gives you an idea of the main topics and applications of it. What did we put at the very top too is kind of present bias. What do we mean by that? Impatience, the idea of taste for immediate gratification. Those are names, hyperbolic discounting if you want. The idea that people are kind of very sensitive to immediate cost. If I have to, sign up for a webinar like this and it takes like 10 clicks instead of 2 clicks, a lot of people will drop out because it just, those bureaucratic obstacles. And those bureaucratic obstacles are often really important in signing up for health plans, for retirement savings, claiming benefits. And so these are kind of big topics. People respond a lot to immediate costs, and they may not respond enough to future benefits. So how do we make that work? How do we get people to overcome these obstacles? We feel is one of the key issues that come up, and one of the key contributions of behavioral economics with its models to the area of public policy. But we're not done here. Incorrect beliefs. So I think often people may have the wrong perception about returns to the stock market or mutual fund fees, or whether the benefits are there, the probability of exiting unemployment or flood insurance. You can see that at the center of this word cloud. And so or like their expected gym attendance, a topic that is close to my heart and also Katie Minkman's heart. And I think this area of understanding where incorrect beliefs from, is that motivated reasoning, is that memory, but in any case, they play into decisions that people make that have public policy relevance. And of course, we couldn't do this, we couldn't be doing this without prospect theory and reference dependence, the idea that judgments are comparative. This is like one of the tenets from psychology, embedded in prospect theory, the idea that people compare things to reference point. The reference point may be the wage on your previous job, and you're loss averse to that, for example. And so this is kind of, there's a number of, so wage cuts are, more painful, in absolute sense than a comparative wage increase. And so that's also something that plays an important role. What is our fifth area is social preferences and social norms. So social preferences goes back all the way to fairness, inequality aversion, but we sort of think that the part about social signaling, social norm is kind of the more modern and maybe the most influential part of that literature, the idea that identity matters. People want to be perceived in a particular way, and that might stand in the way maybe of claiming benefits if they think that that's not something that would go well with their identity. And so interventions and that are based on that, and generally understanding this plays an important role. So these are the forces, and we really do think, obviously this doesn't cover everything, but we do think that especially as far as things that matter for public policy decisions, these 6 forces, five forces already go a long way to kind of better understanding puzzling patterns in human behavior. So the second topic I want to turn to is, if you've seen some behavioral economics, maybe you've seen some kind of, lab experiments, or you've seen some sort of studies, and you might wonder, really, does it really matter for public policy? It's kind of a legitimate question. In particular, what areas of policy does it affect the most? And I think what the report says, there is a gamut of things that go from the theory, the lab experiments, the field studies, the policy. It's actually kind of a continuum, and some areas have been particularly investigated that matter for public policy. One is health. So questions like, are people taking the drugs, the statins for the heart that have been prescribed? Do they refill? Do they make the right health insurance choice? It's complicated. The market structure is complicated. And people do seem to have a very hard time making choices that would seem to be kind of uncontroversial, and they make dominated health plan choices, among others. Now, retirement benefits, this is kind of really classic, is one of the places where this started, is to say people don't seem to be saving enough for retirement, given the general evidence that many people have kind of drop-offs at consumption and retirement. And so can we, why is it happening? Can we do something with respect to that? And the famous kind of default intervention and smart plan, certainly that's something that is probably in people's mind if you followed some behavioral economics. And a third one is, broadly speaking, you can think of it as safety nets. So what about SNAP claimants? What do we know about people that do and do not take it up? Why are there cycles every 6 months of people not reclaiming benefits when they have to reapply? And what about welfare and housing take up, Medicaid, Medicare, and so in general, kind of a broad investigation of take up. And usually here the emphasis is both mostly on people that are eligible and don't take up, like the EITC, and at the same time, the opposite could be people that are instead not eligible and are taking up, although that's kind of less of the focus of the behavioral research per se. So then there are three areas where there is work on, but we also kind of see them in areas in development, work in progress, which is kind of, is great, but we don't think we've seen anywhere near most of the work on it. And environmental change is like the study of between behavioral economics and environment is really important, because if you think about people like saving on natural gas and heating use, I mean, that would start from having a thermostat or start from having information that you can decode. People don't have a hard time understanding and distinguishing between marginal and average cost of energy. And so there is kind of a lot of interesting research in this coming down to kind of power and really people kind of understanding marginal average incentives. Education, to what extent, let's say, misunderstanding the returns to education or text messages to parents or to kids, and there is or simplifying FAFSA forms. You can see some of that in emphasizing the words in here. And criminal justice is one that it would seem like there would be more behavioral crime economics, and there isn't maybe as much as we'd like to see to figure out what works into deterrence, what the effect of incarceration. Certainly people seem to misperceive, and sort of that's something that we expect more work to happen. So the last part of the presentation, I want to devote it to 5 questions about the future. Now, before I go into that, it would be wise for me to quote a giant in the field, Danny Kahneman, who said, "What would I eliminate if I had a magic wand? Overconfidence." So I'm just about to turn overconfident and tell you what could be things that will be happening in the future. Now, that's kind of why I want to put this as a question. None of us have a magic wand, and I certainly do not. But those are some of the things that as I mulled over in my own research, as the committee kind of came together, it's a mixture of things that come from the joint work and sort of things that stand to me from that could be of interest, and some of which that I've been working on. So with due caveats, here it is. The first one, there is something bizarre about, if you think about the intellectual history of behavioral economics. behavioral economics literally came out of the meeting of minds in psychology and economics. That's why in some places like Berkeley, it's still called psychology and economics. So Kahneman and Tversky, meet Taylor, Kammerer, Loewenstein, you literally have those interdisciplinary conferences. But today, that's actually kind of not that common. Mostly behavioral economists have their conferences. They often work with just other economists, and there is some overlap with behavioral decision making. But psychology, it'd be rare to see an economist at a psychology conference. And so why isn't there more of the interaction? Where could that happen? So the committee has an explicit chapter on the idea that there are important ties to cognitive psych and signal processing that could really matter. So in some sense, it's not quite saying that, but in some sense, while the Kahneman-Tversky research was cognitive and mainly social psych, in some sense, these days, maybe the point of closest contact is with cognitive psych, which is to say, for example, the work in economics and behavioral economics on rational attention. Like clearly people misperceive things. Are they misperceiving it rationally or not? The idea from even kind of interesting work from laboratory, kind of if we think of the work of Ryan Oprea, Ben Yankee, Thomas Graeber, many other people, where some of the anomalies that we thought were due to preferences might be due to the fact that people misperceive lotteries or probabilities. So that goes again into perception. And models from neural perception like drift diffusion, which is the picture to the side, where you use decision time as well as the ultimate decision to make inference about people's preferences and beliefs. This is, for example, something I've been working on with Dave Card and Dimitri Taubinski, my colleagues, to say, look, maybe you can use drift diffusion and decision time to explain expert choices, like the choices of editors and referees of scientific journal. But obviously there is a number. This is just one part, in a way, in this cognitive revolution, how some people call it in behavioral economics. The second thing is, surely you're expecting us to say there is an important methodological take. Maybe one was the cognitive one, but and maybe it's somewhat surprising, but the committee, one of the things the committee finds is that the really important methodological take has to do not so much with behavioral economics per se, but with the reporting of evidence, and in particular, publication bias. Why do we do that, and what do we mean? So in other words, the idea that the work of research transparency is very germane to a healthy development of behavioral economics. So even though by no means it's like this is kind of something that it applies to all sciences. So publication bias broadly means that you are less likely to publish statistically insignificant effect sizes. So you are more likely to publish larger effects. And so this is actually particularly an issue if plausibly many of the findings from smaller behavioral interventions could have a real but small effect size. So the publication bias could affect things more. So I'm going to get a little bit into the details of this, but kind of one of the things that we highlight, the first thing is like when you read any literature, I think it's important to be aware of the fact that there is going to be some selective reporting of results. This is not to say that the results are not real, but let's say that the cases where researchers find a zero null effect in a study, those are less likely to make it into Science or the AER or the Quarterly Journal of Economics or Journal of Personality and Social Psychology. Then when you read those journals, you're going to get an estimate of an effect size that is boosted upward because the zeros get removed. So this is one of the graphs, is from Andrews and Casey, but actually coming back to the Kammerer et al. Replication work of lab experiments in economics and science, where on the x-axis there is the effect size, and on the y-axis there is a standard error, and anything to the right of this gray line is statistically significant. And I guess what you can see in here is there is no dots at all in this area. And those points would be the ones that are not statistically significant. So basically in this sample, it really looks like there probably were a bunch of studies in here and they just didn't get published, and therefore people aren't aware of it. So one of the implications of this, which I think is really important, is people may be powering studies for effect sizes as too large. So if you're saying, oh, I'm going to get some evidence on retirement savings or like health behaviors, and the sample size is big enough such that if there is an effect of half a standard deviation of some behavioral interventions on take-up of medicines, then I'm good. Well, expecting a half a standard deviation is not realistic. And maybe that the non-realistic prior comes from reading papers in the literature that might be the especially successful ones. So I think it is important to expect effect sizes that are smaller, more like 0.1 standard deviation. So this, for example, is from a study that Elizabeth Linus and I published last year in Econometrica, which had access to all the effect sizes for a series of nudge unit interventions. And those interventions that actually have an effect size of 1.5 percentage points, so statistically significant, were powered for about 1 percentage point effect, which is about half a standard, 0.05 standard deviation, so well powered. On the other hand, studies in the literature were much well powered, more like 0.3 standard deviation, and that low statistical power with publication bias is a recipe potentially for trouble. So I'm going to skip this. So let me mention kind of a couple things that could be important to fight back against publication bias. One is to find ways to have less selective publications. So, you know, Katie and Kotos have pioneered this series of mega studies, which one of their many advantages where you find a setting, let's say COVID vaccinations or some, take up of some savings account, and then you're going to run 20 interventions in that setting. That kind of guarantees that everything gets reported and things are compared apple to apple. That's a great setting. And you could have administrative data sets where interventions are recorded without the selection of publication or reporting bias. I also am a co-PI with Eva Vivald in the social science prediction platform that you can see down there. You can go Google it, and people can just for free, just kind of register study and get forecasts on effect sizes. And in fact, we just opened a panel of super forecasters, so you're going to get a larger number of forecasts on your studies if you post. And what is the idea of that is that oftentimes people might have a precise null, and that null really is not really a null. You're rejecting the priors, but if you hadn't captured the priors, you can't draw the conclusion. So let me just briefly, but a minute left, just to mention more quickly two more things. The first one is, do behavioral econ results scale? Like there might be a first study, but what do we know if that replicates in other settings? That is super important. For example, like the idea of conceptual replication, how an effect differs across location. Is there a difference in location? Does the year matter? Does the PI matter? Do all the Stefano DellaVigna effects look different in somebody else? Then it's kind of weird, right? You wouldn't want everything to be driven by one lab. And so we need more work on scaling to look at the replication. The second one is behavioral economics weird? And what I mean by that, the results from Western sample unrepresentative. That could be, but actually something interesting is the work in development economics and behavioral development. This chapter in the handbook of behavioral economics by Michael Kremer, Gautam Rai, and Frank Schilbach makes the point that actually when you look in India and Kenya, what you find is typically the exact same channel, the exact same 5 biggies that you find in Germany and Canada and the US. And so they manifest itself differently, but it looks like the key preferences are the same, but there could also be cultural differences. We need more evidence. And finally, my kind of final point is, it's a really interesting question, the implications on inequity and inequality. And so John Campbell made the point that behavioral errors could account for some part of wealth inequality if people that have kind of lower education, low SES, are also running into the kind of mistakes that behavioral economics interventions could help. So one hope is that behavioral economics could help narrow inequality, but possibly sometimes it could have the opposite effect. And I think the committee thinks that's a really important area to think about in the future. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Stefano. That was wonderful. I will begin asking you a few questions. Do you mind removing the slides just so that our faces are huge and everyone can see us full screen. Amazing. That was just terrific. So we had an incredible number of participants and we have a ton of questions. So I may skip some that I had prepared in order to get to them faster. In fact, what I'm going to start with is sort of combining two questions and two different points of view that we have actually talked about beforehand, which is some people look to behavioral economics and say, wow, look at things like defaults. They have such big effects. It seems like we can solve all problems costlessly with nudges if we just find a few more things like defaults and put them to work. Yep. Others, so this is the combination part, say behavioral economics seems like it's just a fad. And if you look carefully at meta-analyses, there's one published in PNAS recently where if you sort of tune some assumptions correctly, it looks like there's zero effect of these things. And that's one claim that's out there too. So those are two really extreme perspectives, right? Like we can solve everything if we just find a few more things like defaults and it'll be free. And behavioral economics is a fad that's based on nothing. Could you tell us where you think the truth lies?
Yeah, that's a wonderful question. So if you looked at, let's say, how sometimes you can have huge impacts on retirement savings by changing the default from obtain to opt out, or you do a smart plan with automatic escalation, then you might say, we solve global warming, let's just apply behavioral economics. But Richard Thaler and Kat Sunstein in the book will be the first ones to tell you, no. The way we're going to address global warming, ideally, would be with a carbon tax and with regulation and so on. So those are, if you're going to need to achieve reductions by 30, 40% in CO, you're not going to be able, you shouldn't think of doing it with nudges. Now, that doesn't mean that we cannot get sizable reductions of energy consumption in homes by using behavioral economics nudges at almost no cost. So, all power, the kind of comparisons to neighbors, providing people information, designing better thermostats, that almost surely can get us reduction. It has gotten us reduction in all power studies of around 1 to 2%. I mean, that's great. It comes for free. So I think like we definitely need to have a realistic thing. And by no means behavioral economists think that nudges could substitute taxes or subsidies or incentives, but it should be coupled with those. Now, the other question is, well, maybe it is zero other than some, selective ones. And I think that is a legitimate question. And I think the answer is pretty clear that it's not zero. So power is a good example. If we look at the work, Hantako's beautiful paper where it looks at many of these power interventions, and the effect size oscillates is always between 1.5% and 2% reduction, really remarkably consistent. Kind of Katie and Cotter's work on mega studies to find that the effect size of intervention, sometimes there's a big winner, sometimes not, but they do clearly kind of have an impact if you have reminders, if you have like some kind of comparisons. I'm going to, Katie can speak to this better than I do. And another place that we looked at it with Elizabeth Linas in nudge units, we were able to get the full list of the nudge interventions. And we find an effect size that the average intervention impacts public policy outcomes by 1.5 percentage point, which is about 8%. So we can very clearly roll out to zero. But it's really it's going to be important. That's why I said replication is really important, because we're going to need to make more progress towards kind of understanding those questions in the future. But I think it's, the current knowledge is that it's clearly not like 30 percentage points, but it's very clearly not zero.
Okay, that was really helpful and actually addressed a lot of questions that are in the chat right now or in the Q&A. One other topic we had already agreed we would cover, and that has come up in a bunch of people's questions spontaneously, is an unpleasant one. So I want to bring up the recent accusations of data fraud against two very high-profile behavioral scientists, Francesca Gino and Dan Ariely. And in light of the accusations and the evidence that's been presented to date, reporters and others are asking whether fraud is widespread in our field and what can be trusted. And so I'd really love your thoughts on that and on what can be done to enhance everyone's trust in our science, and including our own trust in the science going forward.
Yeah, thank you, Katie. It is really important to call out kind of the elephants in the room, and that's it's a difficult topic. I would say that there is going to be like a multi-pronged approach to make for more transparency, which is going to make the research more credible and make it less likely that things totally don't replicate, or in the worst case scenario, that there are cases of fraud. So by the way, and one thing I want to start from, I actually showed this graph that shows that for lab experiments in the Kahneman-Treisman replication, it looks like the known significant were not published. The positive side of that is even those papers that were replicated, the effect size replicated about 70% of the original. So it largely did, it was a smaller effect size, but it's certainly not like, even those where you worried about publication bias and it went to zero. So what I would say is we're going to need some of the following. Some of it is, it should be easy for people to replicate and check. And so I think from that perspective, we've seen tremendous progress. I think, one in the social sciences, I believe the American Economic Review was the first journal. In fact, Robert Moffett, that about 20 years ago required all empirical papers to post the data, to post the material. Doesn't mean that it couldn't be fraud, but it's going to make it a lot easier for people to check. In fact, the papers that in economics have posted, I don't know if somebody is replicating. Presumably, people have looked at them and so on. I would only hear if there's some issues, but people can easily access those. And more recently, in fact, the last 5 years, policy the kind of Esther Duflo started has increased put in place a data editor that automatically replicates papers before they get posted. And so I think that's also kind of really useful. So that's only one prong of it. I think encouraging replication is really important. So if that's kind of one of the things why I really love so much the idea of mega studies, because some of it is actually in a new setting, it gives explicit incentives also to say, let's take something that is known to work in a setting and let's take another one. Maybe we'll tweak it. But in general, how do we make sure that journals, conferences, researchers find that interesting? And to me, one of the reasons the replication question is so interesting is that none of the replication is exact replication. When the world changes, the setting changes, and there is so much to be learned about how the results vary. It's not at all like, oh, we get like 80% of the region. No, but like, does it matter more if the location changes, if the PIs change, or is it functional sample size? I think a better understanding of conceptual replication will make a world of difference. And I think we are well positioned in behavioral economics to make progress on this. And I would mention other things like pre-registrations are helpful so that you have more confidence of what the authors are looking at is the kind of, say, heterogeneity you were looking at before. So I think in short, there is not going to be kind of one solution, but I think like transparency and is kind of going to go a long way. And I think behavioral economics really has a chance to be at the forefront of that, and to so people kind of would have more confidence about our findings.
I love those answers. And I'm going to add a little bit just to sort of say, I'm excited because the board that at the National Academies that's sort of hosting this event, co-hosting this event, is going to be having some conversations about ways we can support these issues. And one thing that I want to add to what you mentioned is it feels like there's also some more we could do around validating whether or not the data that people post openly matches the data they collected, either by having multiple authors sign off that they've seen the original data and that they know it hasn't been monkeyed with, or through other validation methods that protect the privacy of participants, but still allow us to confirm that people are publishing without selective reporting. So, okay.
Good idea.
We could have a 3-hour discussion of this, but let me move on to some really wonderful questions that we have from the audience here. And I'm not going to be able to get to all of them because there are dozens, but I will start with one that I find kind of interesting and want to hear your answer to from Dave. There are many interesting ones. Dave asked, a few years ago, an economics professor told me that at his previous university, if he had mentioned the term behavioral economics, he would have been fired. Is behavioral economics becoming accepted by traditional economists?
Yeah, thank you for contributing that. One of my colleagues who is now a very good friend and collaborator, when I came into Berkeley, called it Wakanomics. That's how you called it at Princeton, behavioral economics was Wakanomics. And I think like it's a matter of building trust. It's a matter of building for a better building. And that's actually kind of one thing I wanted to say, that one of the advantages and disadvantages of behavioral economics is that it kind of is a big tent. What do I mean? It kind of spans from the insights of behavior that are fundamentally psychological, cognitive, all the way to empirical investigations that are looking at field data and kind of economic theories. Now, in all of those, we want to be state of the art. So you don't want to be behavioral economist to do a subpar study of field data, or to have subpar models, or to have a poor understanding of the psychology. And that's kind of hard because we sort of have to do three things. Well, you could argue if you are a very good labor economist, there is a more narrow set of things that you need to be very good at. And so that's actually kind of one way. Sometimes behavioral economists take a little longer to get to like the point of high creativity, because in some sense they're trying to spend this. But I think we can do it, like doing in our seminar, we typically have kind of a theorist and an empirical person, and we, with somebody that's more lab work, and we try to learn from all of those and respect what's in there. And I think, again, it's really, I think we have gotten more respected by just taking those things seriously. And recently, as I said, the research transparency, we don't want to, we want to be upfront and attack that head on. And I think if you do that, and people are like, okay, these guys are, and the last thing I would say is there was a misperception 30 years ago that behavioral economics was going to, a la Kuhn, revolutionize and throw away that hate in neoclassical economics. But truth of the matter, neoclassical economics has some wonderful tools, like the idea to measure magnitudes, the idea that people make optimizing decisions, great tools that other social scientists in part have picked up, like political science. Now, even the CS literature is figuring out, oh, you can't do everything with AI. You need causal things that are picking up from economics. So behavioral economics very clearly has not wanted to throw it away, rather to actually build from it and enrich it. So, have models that have reference dependence in there, have present bias. And so then, like, why should we then be controversial? There's not really, we're not seeking controversy. We're just trying to be very serious and also be serious about kind of human psychology. And I think the last like 5-10 years, I hope you'll be a lot less likely to hear that behavioral economists that it's a slur, that it's an insult. I think it is. I think we're kind of seen as reasonable citizens of the academia, and I hope that will continue.
Wonderful. Okay, I'm going to jump to a question we just got from one of the co-chairs of this report, Allison Buttenheim, who is here. Hi, Allison. Thanks for joining. She would like you to comment on how behavioral economics could and should incorporate advances from other fields like neuroscience and AI. Yeah.
And Allison, has been an incredible force behind this. So I wish that you had kind of seen her talk through this. She's, it's been, she's been an incredible contributor, like so many of the people in the committee. So one of the things I voiced, which is, I think there is it's really important, the idea of the cognitive insights, misperception, decision time, coming from kind of cognitive and neuroeconomics. I think there is going to be really interesting questions about, can we understand treatment effects, like experimental effects, and their heterogeneity, especially in light of AI and machine learning. I do think we have to be a little bit careful in that, in the sense that I think we need, one of the things that we want, that's one reason to have a well-powered study. So if you have a study where the mean effect size is a T of 10, it's going to be a wonderful place to look for heterogeneity. And I worry a little more if a T is of 2.1, then the heterogeneity could bring us, bring us back, if we don't do the statistical model right, into the realm of p-hacking. So I think they can go together, having well-powered studies, and then we definitely want to use the machine learning AI for heterogeneity and Yeah, I think those are just two thoughts, but there is kind of, way more to do in that direction.
I love that answer. And let me actually ask Allison if she's still with us. Allison, in the Q&A, could you post information about the event you are hosting? Because Stefano pointed out that lots of people will be interested in hearing from you. And I know you're going to be doing an event, I think with the Center for Health Incentives and Behavioral Economics, to talk more about some other aspects of the report. And people will love to hear about that. Okay,
Yeah,
we have
Miss Allison.
we have a question from E. Glazer. We'll guess as to whether or not that's someone we know. It may be, but E is unclear. Even though behavioral economics has a lot to work out internally, the question is, are there insights from behavioral economics that can be mainlined into government decision-making and policy? And actually, the real question is, how would we mainline those insights, given that we know they exist? So what should we be doing differently to mainline those insights?
Yeah. That's a really big question. So let me take it at maybe at least two levels. So one, you could be a city, a medium-sized city in the US, and cities have a lot of kind of day-to-day issues that they're dealing with. People are not composting enough, and they're not paying their property tax in time, and they're going and renewing their driver license at DMV, creating lines, even though they could do it online and not creating lines. So there, I think behavioral economics is trying to work as to speed those things and to let people know effectively. Because if you get a 2-page densely worded letter that from the DMV that tells you can renew online, you're just, that may just fly above your head. But if it's going to be clearly worded with a little box and it can go to the site, it saves you in 2 hours, that could just that makes that work better. So sometimes it's a sum of the little things that can be improved, and that's a lot of what the Nigerians are doing. Now, on the other side, if we're trying to create at the federal level retirement savings incentive, okay, well, behavioral economics has played an important role there. The work of many people, obviously Richard Taylor, David Leibson, John B. Shears, James Choi, Bridget Madrian, you keep going, Katie also included. And then it's like, okay, so can we create incentives for firms to do automatic escalation? Is that going to work? What if you set defaults, but the default retirement saving will be set at 2%? Well, that's not going to be any good because, 2% retirement saving default is just going to get people stuck at a place where it's not enough. So I think we learned a lot. So I think it goes from the macro, like changing default savings, to the very micro, working in cities. But I don't think that's really different than the public finance economist that is trying to figure out how should we design, property taxes to reduce the deadweight loss. And we're sort of in a similar mission. And in fact, we do need those same tools. We need elasticities and we need deadweight loss. And so it's just, but E. Glazer, whether Ed or not, we kind of started late because for a long time, behavioral economists were really worried to be seen as too paternalistic, or we wanted kind of to make sure we had the right tools. But now I think we're trying to do that work, and we hope that that we'll do it well enough.
That was a great answer. And unfortunately, I'm realizing we have 1 minute left, so I'm going to say some closing remarks. And I just want to thank the many fabulous audience members who have listed questions. Lots of our friends there. Angela Duckworth had some great questions. Josh Clayman, so many others. I've pasted all the questions that you posted, and we may send you private emails about some of them since we can't get to them all live. But thank you for coming. We really appreciate it. And let me now sort of wrap up. And first of all, I want to thank you, Stefano. That was a fantastic summary of an incredibly dense report that, again, was placed in the chat at the beginning. I'll put it in the chat right before we log off one more time for anyone who joined late. And you can download and read the whole thing if you want, but you've got the Cliffs Notes thanks to Stefano. Really appreciate all of the audience members. I saw, well over 500 people, and I think that was just a given moment in time. So more than that logged in at different moments. We are going to make this presentation available on YouTube. So keep an eye out for an email sharing that link in case you want to pass it along to someone else who couldn't be here. And I just want to offer a huge thanks to the National Academies for convening this event, and to our co-hosts. We worked with a bunch of organizations to spread the word, and who co-hosted this with us: the Behavioral Science and Policy Association, Penn's Behavior Change for Good initiative, which I co-direct, Penn Center for Health Incentives and Behavioral Economics, Harvard's Behavioral Insights Group, Princeton's Kahneman-Treisman Center for Behavioral Science and Public Policy, Chicago Booth's Roman Family Center for Decision Research, and Stefano, the organization that you and Ulrike are
The
leading.
Initiative for Behavioral Economics and Finance at Berkeley, yes.
At Berkeley, which we need to get a logo for. And we really appreciate all of those organizations for their support. And also, I would be remiss if I didn't point out that Tina Winters from the National Academies it made happen and put this all together. So thank you to her. And also to Dan Weiss, who is the leader of the board that sort of made all of this happen. So thank you to so many people, and I hope everyone has a great weekend and into the Friday.
Thanks so much.